let's just jump right into it. Today, we're doing an explainer on something called the money paradox. And to really get to the bottom of this, we're taking our cues from the author of our guiding newsletter, Papa. Papa has this core philosophy: treating your investments as a smart, disciplined process means facing a pretty uncomfortable truth. You actually have to get comfortable with losing money in order to make money. It sounds crazy, right? But this isn't a casino. It's about taking managed risks. We're going to dive deep into human nature today to see how taking a terrible loss can completely transform into invaluable wisdom, and why running away from failure at all costs is actually the fastest way to ruin your finances. To figure out why losing money physically hurts us, let's play a quick game. This was designed by the Nobel Prize-winning economist Daniel Kahneman. Imagine I'm flipping a coin. If it lands on tails, you lose $10. Boom, gone. So here's the question. How much would you need to win on heads to make taking that risk worth it to you? Really think about it for a second. What's your number? Well, if you're like the vast majority of people, you'd demand a win of $20 or more just to risk losing that original 10. That little hesitation you felt in your gut, that right there is loss aversion bias. It's the psychological reality that we feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining the exact same thing. Think of it like a biological alarm bell. Back in the day, this ancient brain wiring kept our ancestors alive because losing a meal meant literally starving in the woods. But today, that same survival instinct totally short-circuits our financial decisions, turning a natural human trait into our absolute biggest vulnerability. And that vulnerability is super dangerous when you look at the actual environment we're operating in. We all crave safety, but macroeconomic history is basically just a rising tide of complexity, from the creation of the Fed to moving totally away from the gold standard, to the massive bank bailouts in 2008, our financial system isn't some calm, protective pond. It is a wildly volatile, state-managed ocean where central banks are constantly trying to tame a totally untamable beast. And this brings us to the actual paradox of money. Relying on the system to keep things perfectly stable is a massive trap. Because we use fiat money with no intrinsic physical value, and because institutions are always intervening, market crashes are not rare anomalies. They are completely guaranteed realities. So if you want to survive this unpredictable roller coaster, you have to realize that external safety nets are an illusion. You need your own disciplined, internal process to weather the storms. The economist Pedro Schwartz actually hit the nail on the head here when he pointed out that systematic intervention by central banks is, in the end, counterproductive. Just let that sink in. The external guards cannot save you from the volatility. And that means your own psychology, how you handle your own fear, your sweat, and that deep-seated loss aversion is literally the most important factor in your financial survival. Everything comes back to your own mind. So what does ignoring that psychology actually cost us? Let's think about a seemingly tiny number, 3.06%. It looks pretty harmless, right? But don't think of this as just a statistic. Think of it as a massive and visible leak that is slowly sinking the average person's financial ship over the course of their life. This one number represents the absolute tension between rational discipline and pure, unadulterated emotional panic. In 2022, we saw this invisible leak play out in real time. It was the performance gap between the average equity investor and the broader market. While the S&P 500 dropped about 18%, the average investor lost over 21%. Imagine the visceral feeling of the market bottoming out. Your heart is racing, you're sweating, and you just want the pain to stop. That is loss aversion, taking the wheel. We sell our assets in pure terror, lock in those losses at the absolute bottom, and completely miss the inevitable rebound. Which brings us to a golden rule of financial discipline. A drop in the daily price of your portfolio, that's just data. It's just flashing numbers on a screen. It only turns into permanent wealth destruction if you give in to your emotions and actually hit the sell button. Staying disciplined when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to run away is the true test. As Jim Dahl puts it, you simply don't lose until you sell. All right, moving into section 1, the anatomy of failure. We're going to look at why ventures and investments actually collapse, bringing this all back to the business side of losing money. Research out of Babson College points to 3 big traps for early ventures, famously called the TIM mistakes: talent, ideas, and money. But the real root cause linking all these failures is a lack of skin in the game. You hire a bad apple, fund a useless idea, or run out of cash because the person making the call didn't have enough personal, painful risk attached to the outcome. When you have real skin in the game, you suddenly find the intense focus required to make smart, well-studied decisions. Now, when the ship does go down, and eventually it will, your psychology completely dictates your recovery. Imagine two founders. The first blames the economy, the weather, the regulators. Their ego is safe, for sure, but they learn absolutely nothing. The second founder looks inward and asks, what could I have done differently? Taking that personal responsibility is agonizing, but that internal locus of control is exactly what leads to massive growth the next time around. This brings us to a brilliant concept championed by Papa's father, Papa Q Bear, the return on learning. Every single successful builder and investor has crazy stories about the invaluable lessons they got from a terrible loss. Sometimes you just have to pay to learn. A massive loss isn't the end of your story. It's just the steep tuition fee for a masterclass in resilience. We have to stop trying to avoid failure at all costs and start figuring out how to maximize our return on learning when the hit comes. So how do we get that return on learning safely? You use a premortem. Before you ever put your skin in the game, sit down and have a brutal, honest conversation about exactly what would kill this venture. Define what acceptable loss looks like upfront and list the warning signs. You're basically building a psychological defense mechanism while your head is clear, unemotional, and completely free from the panic of loss aversion. Dr. Yasuhiro Yamakawa, who is actually known as Dr. Failure, sums it up perfectly. There is always value if you're determined to find the lesson. Investing is a disciplined process. It's not pulling the lever on a slot machine. A loss is just a data point, an event. It's not your identity. Accept the risk, make sure you have skin in the game, and use the rubble of your mistakes to build a much stronger foundation for next time. Okay, Section 2, Strategic Defenses. Let's talk about actionable tactics for the downturn, mechanically protecting ourselves from our own worst instincts. First up is tax loss harvesting. On paper, it's just a tax maneuver, but psychologically, it's a total game changer. It tricks your ancient brain. When the market drops and you're freaking out, this tactic lets you score an immediate psychological win. You book a tax deduction, lowering your pain, while simultaneously buying back into a similar asset to catch the recovery. You're literally turning your own psychological trap into a mathematical advantage. You also have to actively defend your mind on a daily basis. Zoom out your timeline to look at the decades, not the days. Automate your rebalancing so you don't have to think about it. And absolutely put yourself on a strict media diet. The 24-hour financial news cycle is practically engineered to hack your caveman brain and make you act impulsively. Turn off the TV, ignore the screaming headlines, and stick to your discipline. So as we wrap up this explainer, let's lock in what we've learned. Embrace loss as the painful but necessary price of wisdom. Keep your skin in the game so you actually care about making well-studied decisions. And never treat risk like a casino. Treat it as a lifelong, disciplined process. I'll leave you with a thought inspired by Papa and Colonel Debs. Are you playing it so incredibly safe that you're actually capping your own potential? Normalize the struggle. Step into the arena. And ask yourself, what did you fail at this week, and how will you use that inevitable loss to buy the wisdom you need to finally succeed?